Session 3 of heating, we're now going to look at testing and commissioning of heating systems. So the key objectives, I want you all to be able to list and order the commissioning process, explain how to carry out each step of the commissioning process, and that's it really. So commissioning, part L of the building regulations puts a big emphasis on the importance of commissioning. The reason for that is if it's completed correctly, the system should work to its design specifications. If it's not completed correctly, it can have a huge impact on efficiency. Commissioning the system. Well, you'd actually find information on commissioning as part of the installation instructions of each of the component parts, like the boiler, etc. But we're going to go over it briefly in this session. So how you commission a sealed system like a combi boiler and an open vent system has a lot of the same principles essentially. They might differ in some respects, but we're going to look at the general principles today. Obviously, make sure that if you're commissioning a gas boiler and the gas supplies, you should make sure that only a qualified gas installer does that part of the commissioning process. Okay. So, a brief breakdown of what's involved in commissioning. Firstly, you do a visual inspection of the system and pipe work. Check that that there's nothing sort of obviously wrong visually. You then carry out a pressure test, a soundness test. That would depend which soundness test you carried out would depend on whether it's a rigid pipe system made of metal, or if it's a plastic pipe system, or if it's a combined system of some metal and some plastic. Once you've done the pressure test, you then do a cold flush to remove any debris from the pipework. And once you've done that, you then refill it and carry out a performance test. And that's where checking that everything's working the way that it should do. After the performance test, you might want to do a hot flush, and that would help remove excess flux. And then finally, you'd do your final fill and protect the system as part of your final fill, and then take the appropriate steps for handover with regards to explaining to the customer how the system works, etc. And we're going to look at each of those steps now. So our first steps, as we've discussed, is a visual inspection. And once we're happy the system's got no open ends, it's got no obvious kind of issues with it, then we know that it's ready for soundness testing. And the information on soundness testing for a rigid pipe and plastic pipe is found on a easel, okay, on our Moodle. After soundness test, you then sort of flush the system, and that would remove any debris that might have built up in the pipes as part of the installation process. And some people might carry out the flushing with a system cleanser, followed by a system neutralizer in some cases if it's an acidic cleanser. And that can help remove more flux. But it's not necessary. You could potentially just flush it with wholesome water, but sometimes with heating systems, people might add system cleansers followed by system neutralizer if required to assist with flux removal. So when the system's been flushed, you then refill with water and carry out the performance test. And performance test is essentially just checking everything's working the way that it should do. And you can use the benchmark commissioning checklist to help assist with that, which would be come with the boiler normally. So some of the things you check the program or a time control is working as it should. The relevance thermostats are switching the system on and off as required. The motorized valves are opening and closing as they should do in relation to when the room start or cylinder start calling out for heat. Check the boilers firing up and the pump starting and circulating as it should. Essentially, it's checking everything is working the way that it should be. After you've done the performance test, you will have put some heat into the system and round the system. It's often a good idea at this point to let that water go again, release it from the system, and be described as a hot flush, and it can be particularly useful for removing extra flux residue from inside the system. So now we do a final fill. Okay, we fill the system for the last time. Make sure you use a suitable inhibitor. Inhibitor is there to prevent corrosion, minimise the formation of corrosion, which can block up our pipes and radiators. Though if you are commissioning a system which is connected to a single feed-in direct cylinder, you must not use inhibitor, because there's a potential for that to vent into the hot water side, which is obviously something we would like to avoid. Okay, and now finishing the job. Well, whenever you finish the job and you finish commissioning, you'd verbally explain to the customer how to set the controls, how the controls work, and make sure you leave all the relevant information with the customer, like the manufacturer's instructions, installation and operating and servicing instructions, as well as a completed benchmark commissioning book. Let them know that the boiler is going to need regular maintenance, normally every 12 months, and that the Magna Clean also will periodically need to be cleaned. Excuse me. And occasionally, as part of that maintenance process, it might be necessary to turn up the heating for a while. Give the customer an estimated length of time it's likely to be off. You're always better off kind of erring on the side of caution. It's always better to kind of under promise and over deliver than sort of over promise and under deliver. So yeah, make sure that you sort of tell them a wee bit longer than you think you're probably going to need, because sometimes things can take longer than you expect. So if the heating's likely to be off for a long time, especially in the colder months, make sure that there's another method of heating available, particularly for elderly people. Okay, and now it is time for your task.